Third point overall, sex as mission. I would imagine you have no idea what I'm going to say here, and I think this is one of the more misunderstood or even just unknown aspects of the Christian story. Here's what I mean. The Christian story diverges from the modern story of sex in very few places more radically than here. Modern people, we mostly think about sex as an end in itself. It's about your own pleasure, it's about your own happiness, about your own fulfillment. Sex is about sex. And in the Christian story, sex is not finally about sex. It's not even an end in itself, but it's a means to an end to other things, other achievements, other experiences. Sex has a mission, it has a purpose. It doesn't terminate on the experience of sex itself. So here's what I mean. In Genesis 1 and 2, I'm not going to read these passages, but I'm just going to summarize what I think they're saying. You may recognize this. In Genesis 1 and 2, when God creates human beings, at least according to Genesis, purpose dominates the account. There are constantly statements of purpose attached to why human beings have been created. Think about some of the statements that are there. You probably remember or have heard of some of these. One is human beings exist in the world to reflect and bear God's image. That's why human beings are here, to reflect the image of God in the world. Another one is that human beings are called to have dominion over all that God had made and to steward it and to extend God's presence and blessing to the rest of the world. And in Genesis 2, human beings are called to not only bear fruit and multiply, but to work and to serve the Lord in the world that He made. One of the things that I think is clear in Genesis 1 and 2 is that sex is understood within that overall vocation that humanity has. Sex is not like, oh, well, you could have done that anyway, and here's just kind of like an extra benefit I'm giving you. Here's sex, enjoy it. Sex is wrapped up in the reason God made human beings and the purposes, the vocations, the calling that we have, at least according to the Christian story. So think about a couple of ways that this works. And I'm going to reference a passage in Genesis 2 that, in my opinion, is woefully and constantly misunderstood and misinterpreted even by Christians. In Genesis 2, you remember there's this very symbolic picture where Adam, the man, is there in the garden by himself. And it's interesting, before sin enters the world, and after Genesis 1, where 7 times God said, it's good, it's good, it is good, it's very good. In Genesis 2, in the interlude before the fall, before sin, God says something is not good. Not because of sin, but because something's incomplete. In Genesis 2, God says it is not good for the man to be alone. And so He creates woman to be his helper. And I think there is a profound level of misunderstanding both over what the word alone means there, as well as what the word helper means there. I think alone, we constantly interpret, because of our kind of saturation in the story of romantic love as the pinnacle of human existence, as the reason God creates a woman is because the man is lonely. But that's not what it says. It doesn't say he's lonely. It says that he's alone. The point is not that he'd be bored and unhappy. The point is that he has been given a task that he cannot accomplish on his own. He is alone and therefore constitutionally incapable of being what a human being is supposed to be unless something changes. And so the woman is created as his helper so that he would no longer be alone, but be able to fulfill all these tasks, all these purposes humanity has been given. So think about them one by one. Human beings are called to reflect the image of God, according to Genesis. When that is said in Genesis, the very next thing that's said is, and God created them male and female. I know that this is often not known in our society, and even many Christians say the opposite, but historically, Christianity teaches God is not a man. God is not a male. The pronoun he, whatever else it means, it doesn't mean that God is a guy. It doesn't mean that he's a man. And one of the things you see as you read throughout the Bible is that God is constantly described as having both feminine and masculine characteristics. The impression you get from Genesis 1 is that if you just look at men or you just look at women, no matter how ideal they are, you cannot see a very accurate picture of who God is. That men and women together embody and reflect what God is like, or they should. And so the image of God can't happen unless the man is joined by the woman together. The second one, obviously, bear fruit and multiply, can't happen if the man's there by himself. So bear fruit and multiply, he can't accomplish that unless the woman is created. But, and here's where I think the word helper is often misunderstood. We tend to hear the word helper as implying inferiority and kind of subordination. The man's the real thing. He's the real point of the story, and the woman kind of comes in as kind of his servant, kind of to help him do what he's supposed to do. The point is not that the man is called to do these things, and the woman is just to cook for him, while he's doing it. The point is, the very things he's called to do, he can't on his own. He cannot rule and steward the world that God made by himself. So the woman is to help him, not by helping him do that, but by doing it with him. And the man is called to work and to serve God in the world. And the woman is to help him, not by kind of taking care of his needs while he does that, but by doing that with him. And so sex and gender in the Bible are wrapped up with, what are human beings here for? What are they? Who are they? Sex is part of that overall story. It's not an end in itself. Sex in the Bible is missional. It has a point. It has a purpose. Sex is supposed to take us out of ourselves, to draw us towards our neighbor, to draw us towards the world of service, and even to draw us towards God, ultimately in worship. And it's interesting because in our culture, I think sex and sexual relationships have become deeply introspective and static. That they're introspective and that the goal of sexual relationships is understood as kind of terminating on the people who are having sex. It's about your joy and pleasure, and then because there's no really purpose bound up with sex, you're just there. You're having sex, and it's fun while it happens, but it's not doing anything. It's not going anywhere. It's not trying to accomplish anything. And I'm not going to talk about this at length, but just to say, obviously on any interpretation, one of the greatest differences between the way we tend to understand sex and the Christian story does is just the role of children in it. Children don't really fit in the story of sex in our world. And so we either delay children, we don't have them all together, or we only are open to having them insofar as they serve kind of our individual happiness and goals and agendas in life. And the reason that we think about children like that is because the story of sex is about sex. And the reason children are so prominent in the Bible, and even throughout most of human history, because sex is missional. It's taking you somewhere. It's doing something in the world. It's not just an end in itself. Sex is supposed to be about joy, pleasure, individual self-fulfillment. Absolutely. But not only that, and I would argue not even mainly that. And so sex is about the vocation that human beings have in the world, that they're called to bear God's image and to reflect Him in all that they do in this world. Final point. Maybe the most important one. In this story, the Christian story of sex, sex is a symbol. In older language, it's a sacrament. It's sacramental. Here's what I mean. Let me give an example. Maybe some of you have seen this. In the last year or two, Terrence Malick, Harvard grad, put out his movie, The Tree of Life. Anybody see this? I love this movie. I think it's brilliant. And it's elicited endless debate over what the movie is about and what it means. And let me just give a quick overview of kind of the basics of the story. The movie starts by introducing us to this family in Texas in like the 1950s, the O'Briens, and nothing really, spectacular happens. There's no really plot. In some ways, there's really no plot to the story. It's very interesting that way. And early on, in a way that's never explained, you're never told how it's happened, when one of the sons grew up, he died. And there's a great tragedy that rocks the rest of the family for the rest of their lives. It's just a shadow that's over them for the rest of the story. You're never even told, was it Vietnam, was it a car accident, you're not told. And then, midway through the movie, and this has been the most controversial point, all of a sudden it drops the story and it backtracks to the creation of the universe and the Big Bang billions of years ago. And it shows the universe coming into existence. And then it shows matter being formed and universes coming together, and then it kind of tracks the history of Earth. And it even has this weird scene where dinosaurs come out and kind of fight with each other, and then it comes back to the O'Brien family without any explanation. And everybody's like, what in the world is Malick doing here? And I actually want to submit to you that Malick is using a narrative device that he got from the Bible. Malick is famously reclusive. He doesn't give interviews. I get the impression that I think Malick, in some sense, is a Christian. And I want to argue that he gets this device from the Bible. There are many passages in the Bible where the meaning of a very particular individual historical event that on the surface looks pretty insignificant, like the O'Brien family and like the death of their son, is then placed against a cosmic backdrop that forces the reader to make a decision about what you think life is about.